All right. Hi, everyone. Hey, Keenan.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning. Welcome back. This is the final day of AI Build Week. It is day 4. We did have our day 5 on Friday, so the schedule was a bit shuffled there. But welcome back for the final day of AI Build Week. All of these sessions are being recorded. You can find them in our YouTube channel and in the community. They will all be posted there, as well as all of the Q&A. Really awesome questions everyone has been asking throughout the week. All of the questions that we got to and all of them that we didn't have time for, they're all posted in the day's thread in the community. So you can find them there. You can follow up. You can ask us more questions. We're in the community and we're there to help you. So there's still more time to win swag. A few of you have already won swag throughout the week. So just engage here, engage in the community, answer the poll, and you might win something cool. So I'll be following up with those swag winners in a few days later this week. And also, toward the end of the session, you will see a poll. We really want to know your feedback. Did you like these sessions? What do you think? This is the first time we have done something like this. We've never done a multi-day webinar. So massive shout out to Keenan, to Angelique, the other presenter, and also to Daniel Kim, who is behind the scenes, making sure that this runs as smoothly and seamlessly as possible. So thank you so much, Daniel. And lastly, we have a webinar happening tomorrow. If you really like this content, you like more build along content, we actually have one tomorrow at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. It is about building a customer support agent. So you can sign up on our events page. We will be posting it in the chat here. And you can also see all of our builder events in the community. There's a tab on the left-hand side that says upcoming events. So click there. We will be adding the event tomorrow shortly, so you'll see that soon. But that is where you can stay updated to all of these upcoming events, similar to this webinar, or yeah, different things we have going on. So anyway, I will pass it over to Keenan for our final day. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy today's session. All right.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, like Sarah was saying, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us on our last day of AI Build Week. Moved from our Thursday session to today, so thanks for everybody's flexibility. We're gonna dive in and get started. And if you're here to learn about AI in workflows, then you are absolutely in the right place. So today, we've covered how to choose different models. We've covered looking at how vectors work. We've looked at an example of how to put that together in an application. When we talked about how we built Retool GPT to work on our data internally. So today we're going to talk about the actual workflows that work kind of behind the scenes to make these sort of applications work. Things like when to use a workflow versus when to use an AI agent, which, as Sarah mentioned, we discussed on Friday, and just help you hopefully wrap your head around this particular architecture and when it's useful in the context of building tools with AI. So just a little bit of a preview of what we're going to talk about. We're going to look at some common patterns of how different AI workflows sort of show up and when you might want to use this particular architecture in your building with AI. Then we're going to dive right in. This is AI Build Week after all. So we're going to build a workflow from beginning to end that basically watches BlueSky for mentions of a certain term, uses AI to determine if they're relevant or not, and then posts into Slack. So that'll be hopefully pretty cool to see. We're going to talk about a few cases where workflows can be used to integrate into larger systems as opposed to just being standalone things. And then we will preview kind of how that fits into the brand new world of AI agents. So as always, as we're going through, please drop your questions in either the Zoom Q&A or the chat. We got a bunch of Retool folks in there who will be collecting those up, and we will get to them at the end. We'll have plenty of time for questions. So bring as many as you got. All right, so let's take a look at some common patterns of how workflows with AI in them sort of show up. And the three that we're going to look at are called prompt chaining, routing, and parallelization, which is a very hard tongue twister that I had to practice a little bit this morning. So I just wanted to call out that all of these graphics that we have here are from this Anthropic blog post called Building Effective Agents. And in the chat very shortly, we'll be posting a link to a Google Drive folder with resources from today's talk. And this blog post is linked in that resources list. So go check that out if you're interested in more content like this. But one of the common uses for a workflow that contains different AI pieces is when you want to do something called prompt chaining. So for example, if you use a tool like ChatGPT, you can, of course, prompt it, wait for it to have feedback, and prompt it again. You can give it these multiple prompts in a row. But when you want to do that in the context of an automation that runs without human intervention, you need a bit of a different architecture to allow these prompts to move one to the other, right? And so this is an example of how this might work. So we'd have some sort of input. We would feed that input into a large language model call. We would get the output from that call and do something else with it, which we'll see in a little bit what that something else might be. Sometimes that's feeding it into code. Sometimes that's feeding it into a database call or a query, something like that. And then we would just have some sort of failure condition because the output from a large language model is non-deterministic. So maybe you don't get a valid output here, and your kind of next step in the workflow fails, right? So you have some way to say, okay, this isn't what we want. We'll have to try again at some point. But then you would pass all of that information to a second prompt, which you could chain to a third, et cetera. And you could have multiple steps in this workflow, however many you need. But the core idea here is you're basically taking the output from one large language model and feeding it into another, whether that's generated output or whether you're using a large language model to generate a prompt for another large language model. There are multiple ways to kind of go about this, but this is an example of one sort of workflow architecture. And you can imagine, like, if you had a workflow that was trying to write a first draft of an article or a blog post, for example, you might have your first LLM call actually write the first draft of the article itself. You might then pass that article to a second LLM call that looks at, okay, act as an editor, figure out where this article is a little redundant or whether we could, explain more, things like that. Then the third call might be, okay, find me some places where I can insert relevant images here, or take the actions that the editor step recommended and actually, make those changes to the article text and kind of go through. So you can see where instead of just having a single sort of one-shot prompt, this sort of prompt chaining flow is really powerful to kind of get improved output from your large language models. And if you remember, on Monday of last week, Angelique showed us how different models have different strengths. And this is a good way that you can also compare, you can use one model for article generation, for example. If you find another model is just a much better editor in your kind of style, you can use multiple different models in these multiple different LLM calls. And that makes this architecture particularly powerful, especially for more complicated use cases. The second example here is routing. So again, this often comes into play when you're working with multiple different models. And in this case, we have some input. We have a large language model call up front that is kind of making this routing decision. So imagine we have three different models here. We have, a cheap, fast model. We have kind of a mid-tier model, and then we have, a more expensive like reasoning model. So for any given input, if it's just a simple sort of question of recall or just very basic generation, you might not want to actually, pay the extra token cost and use the extra time for the more expensive reasoning model when you don't need it. And so that's where this initial router up front is making that decision that, okay, this is a relatively simple problem. We can probably pass it to the fast, cheap model, right? So this is the kind of decision making that as your systems get more complex, you might need to take on. But again, this is not a behavior you can necessarily get with sort of a one-shot call to a large language model. The kind of exception here is if you've heard of a tool called OpenRouter, it kind of does all of this under the hood. So we do have a webinar we did a while back where we used OpenRouter and we showed how you can just hook it in as a resource to your workflows, and it will automatically make those sort of model routing decisions for you. So there are tools out here that do this, but if you want to do it yourself and have kind of total control over which models you're picking from, what the criteria are you're choosing from, et cetera, this is a way that you can create a workflow that does that as well. And the third is parallelization, that tongue twister we talked about before, right? So in this case, we have an input. We're making kind of three different large language model calls simultaneously. Then we have some sort of aggregation step, to whether we like what we need to get all the outputs basically together. And then we have some sort of output. So you can imagine in this example, Potentially we are, taking a piece of content we have, we want to generate social media posts for Facebook, X, LinkedIn, etc. So we would have, in this case, kind of these three different prompts and say, okay, this is our generation step for a Facebook post. This is, a LinkedIn one, and this is our post for X. So we'd be able to have different prompts for each of those um, social networks that we wanted to set up. And so our input would then run through all three of those prompts all at the same time, and it would generate our outputs for each of those specific social networks. So that this is a case where, again, the input, we don't necessarily need to chain them together, because the output from our post generated for Facebook, for example, isn't useful as an input to our post for X. But we do get the benefit of, because we can generate them all at the same time, our workflow is a lot quicker, and it's able to accomplish what we need to accomplish. So this is an example of a slightly different pattern, where we get the benefits of speed while also being able to take advantage of the fact that we can call all of these at one different point in each other. Cool. So now we've looked at a couple of these different patterns. Let's take a look and actually build one of these. Again, we mentioned this is AI Build Week, so let's just dive in here. So I'm going to tab over here, and we've got basically a blank workflow canvas, and we're going to get started. So like we mentioned, what we're building today is a workflow that basically monitors BlueSky, which is a social network similar to Twitter or X. And anytime there's a post on there that mentions Retool or Retool.com or some variation of Retool, we want to flag it, because we have a dedicated channel in Slack that basically pulls together all of those mentions. But Retool is a pretty common word, and so we don't want to have that Slack channel fill up with mentions of people wanting to retool their fantasy football team, for example, because that's not relevant, right? So that's where the AI piece is going to come in, and we'll see exactly how we do that here in a bit. So we've got our start trigger, which we'll just leave as is for now. We're going to do a little bit of a cooking show sort of model today, because I don't think y'all want to sit here and watch me type out 50 lines of code, for example. So we're going to work in some copy paste, but I'll walk through and explain exactly what we're doing. So we're going to call this step here, get BlueSky posts. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab this from over here. And this is Python code. So we need to swap over to Python. In workflows, we can either use JavaScript or Python. So in this case, I'm going to use Python because we have this AT-Proto library that's really useful for interacting with the BlueSky API. So that is what we'll use that there. We'll import it. I'm going to log in here as myself. And so you'll notice I have this BlueSky API key here. This is an API key that I've kind of pre-generated. Because I'm live sharing my screen, I've just put this as a configuration variable that's kind of stored behind the scenes in a workflow, so that y'all don't go ahead and start posting as me. But we have that set up, and I'm able to kind of log in as myself, which is lets me be able to run the sort of search that I want to run. So you can see here, I'm looking for mentions of retool.com. I'm looking for retool lowercase. I'm looking for retool uppercase, and basically I'm running all of these different searches. I'm combining them together. And at the end of this output, I want to get, a list of basically the combined results of all of those different mentions. So at any point in time, once we have this set up, we can basically run this individual workflow block if we want to. So that's useful for just making sure that our configuration is working correctly. No module named AT-Proto. Perfect. So this is actually something we need to do because I mentioned there's a great library in Python for setting this up. But you can see over here, we're not actually importing any Python libraries yet. So we're going to go ahead and say add Python library. We are going to get our @proto library. I think that should be what we need. Yeah, sounds good. And I'm actually also, once I add this, I'm going to go ahead and add our requests library as well. This is a pretty common library in Python. And we will need it here in a second. So let's just grab that. And it looks like our environment's still setting up. So we'll need that in 1 second. But basically, you can include any of these libraries that are available on the NPM registry or any of the Python registries as well. And that will kind of give you that functionality that you would expect from writing your own sort of Python script and including those libraries in the exact same way. But you can do it inside of a workflow. Cool. So now that we've got these two libraries in, let's try and run this again. We should see that this works as we would expect. Yeah, cool. Get latest query timestamp. This is actually something we will come back to in a second, and we will see why this is not working. But essentially, we're going to add a block in here very soon because when we're querying BlueSky, we're going to have this workflow run every 10 minutes, for example, and we don't want to just continually get the same post that we've already mentioned in Slack, right? So we're going to input a timestamp that says, okay, this is the last time we queried it, only get posts since this time. So we'll come back to this once we get that sorted out and working. But let's go on to our next step here. Cool. So we need to do two things. First of all, it's entirely possible that we don't find any new posts on BlueSky that mention Retool. So in that case, we just want to kind of exit the workflow and and be done with that. So we're going to insert a branch here, and we'll say, okay, we'll just call this if posts found. And again, this is important for naming your blocks is pretty important. It just keeps things a lot cleaner. And for anybody who comes into your workflow and is trying to figure out what's going on, it gives them a little bit more context into what each of these blocks does, as opposed to having to look at all the code. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, cool. If our get BlueSky posts block ran and there is data, which means there are posts associated with it, and that data has length, which means there's at least one, that means we're going to move on with our workflow. So let's go ahead and drag this out to a new block here. And in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to insert another code block. And I call this distill posts. Basically, what this does is there's a whole lot of information that comes back from the BlueSky API about each particular post. And I don't need all of that information for our workflow to be useful, right? So we're just going to go ahead and grab this piece of code here. We're going to use Python again, just for consistency. And what this basically does is just loops through all of the posts that we've gotten, and it gets the important pieces of, okay, what's the URL? What are any of the kind of embeds that we need? And basically just outputs, the text, the URL, any of those sorts of things that we will need later. So it just cleans up our posts array and, makes it so that we only have the information we need, and our AI step that we insert later will not get confused with a bunch of other information that we don't actually need, right? So now, once we have our post list distilled, we have a list of all of the posts that have used either retool.com, lowercase word retool, uppercase word retool. Now is when we need to start making decisions about, okay, are these posts relevant and useful? Do we want to push them all the way through to Slack, or are these definite mentions, but we just want to discard them because they're not really relevant? And that's where we have our AI action, our decision-making step coming in here. So we're going to call this decide relevance. We're going to use Retool AI. We're going to use our generate text action because we just wanted to generate an outputted, updated array of our posts with a score assigned to them, right? So I'm going to grab my prompt here and pull it over, and we'll just go through what this prompt says very quickly. So it says your task is to return valid JSON that has a new score field attached to each item in the array, and the JSON array is provided at the end of this message, right? So based on the text field for the post in the original array, add a score with a value from 1, low likelihood with high confidence, to 10, high likelihood with high confidence. This score indicates whether a post that mentions Retool is likely to be about the software company that builds a platform for software developers to quickly build tools, right? So we're saying, okay, on a 1 to 10 scale, how sure are you that this is about Retool, the company, right? And so then we add some specific rules here based on like posts that we've observed, right? So we say, okay, if a post is clearly about a sports team, it's not about Retool and should be ranked a 1. If the post contains Retool, like a specific mention, right, like that should be ranked a 10. Except in cases where there are more than 8 mentions, because we've detected that that's usually spam. There are a lot of folks that just kind of include a lot of mentions in their post, and that's something we want to include. Things like usage of the word retool as a verb is unlikely to be the company, right? So things like that, we just give it some rules for how we want it to work. And we ask it to return a new valid JSON array with each post's text and URL, along with the corresponding score. Return only the JSON, do not return any other text. So again, just some like prompting rules here to say, okay, we only want JSON. If you were calling the OpenAI API directly, for example, via our REST API integration, you could ask for structured output here, and so you could enforce that sort of JSON output. But in this case, we're just using the AI integration that's built in, and so we just give it a lot of feedback that that's what we want. As far as the model goes, again, this is where it probably makes sense to experiment a bit. I've got some OpenAI models here. I'm going to use Claude Sonnet 4 in my testing. That's kind of been my favorite for this type of task. So we're going to go ahead and use that for our AI step. So when we get here now, we should basically have an array of posts that has a score of between 1 and 10, how relevant they are to Retool. And this is if you remember our like prompt chaining example from before. This is where we're going to chain our large language model output into a code step again, which is just going to do a little bit of cleanup for us. So we're going to call this filter relevant posts. And again, I mentioned before that we have basically an array with all of our posts scored from 1 to 10. And so basically what this is going to do here is just say, okay, look at all of these different posts. And if the score on any given post is greater than a 4, we've decided that's relevant enough to include and push into Slack. So this allows for us, we do get some sort of false positives here because 4 is not that high on a scale of 1 to 10. But we've basically decided that we would rather see more posts that are relevant than potentially miss some relevant posts, right? So we've decided that kind of 4 is our threshold there, but you could adjust this basically as needed. Right? So that's our kind of filtering step. And then basically that will output an array of any posts that it thinks are relevant. And so what we want to do then is we want to do a research query here because we've talked about, actually pushing these into Slack. So we're going to go ahead and grab our Retool Slack bot integration that we already have set up as a resource. We are going to post a chat message and we'll pick a channel and text. But before we do that, I mentioned that we need to potentially handle more than one post at a time, right? This array might have more than one post, and we want to post each post that mentions Retool as an individual message in Slack so that people can respond to each one, et cetera. And so instead of doing this Slack query as a standalone block, what we actually want to do is put it inside of a loop block. So let's take a look at what that looks like. We can do loop here. Our input is our filter relevant posts. So basically this takes the output of our relevant post block, puts it into a loop. We'll call this post to Slack. And we can then decide, do we want to run these loops in parallel, one at a time, or as a batch? Because we're kind of putting each post into Slack, we'll just call this sequential. And we'll just put like a 500 millisecond delay here, just so we don't sort of spam the Slack API. For our loop runner, this is where we actually need to put our Slack resource query now. This is where you can decide, okay, do you want to run some code over this loop? Do you want to use any of your other resources? And we do. We want to use our Retool Slack bot. So let me just type that here, grab it from the list. And now we can do all of the kind of operations we were talking about before. So we do want to post a message. For the text, we're going to say value, because that's what's going to come from, that's each item in the array that's coming from this block. That's how the loop block works. And we'll say URI. I know that's the key that we're going to need, which we will be able to see in a minute. And as far as our channel, this will basically pull up all of our various Slack channels here. But in this case, we want to use our FX tool so we can just type in the name of our channel because we already know what it is. So in this example, I'm just double checking. I built a channel for us that is called AI Build Week BlueSky. Perfect. So that is going to be our channel there. And we're going to post the actual just URL for the BlueSky post. Slack will do what it needs to do to expand that, et cetera. And we should be good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and hit deploy on this just to get everything saved. And like we mentioned, the only kind of final step we need to do here is make sure we're not just posting the same posts into Slack over and over. So that's where our timestamp comes in. So this is a pretty common pattern and actually something that we had a couple questions about last week where if you're running a workflow, in our example, we're going to run it every 10 minutes. How do you make sure that the workflows aren't overlapping or it's not working on duplicate data, et cetera? And that's where this timestamp tool comes in. So Retool has a database built in. We call it Retool DB. And it's a Postgres database that basically works like a spreadsheet in the browser. So you can insert data here, you can upload a CSV, but it's fully Postgres into the hood, which is very useful in a lot of cases. In this case, I've created a BlueSky latest query table, and we'll zoom this in just a bit so you can see what's going on here. And this table only has one row, and basically it just has this date field, this timestamp here. So that's useful in a couple different ways. What we can do is we can actually expand this out a little bit. We need to kind of adjust our blocks over here slightly. And instead of just directly getting the BlueSky posts right away, what we can do is we can insert another block here. We'll make it a resource query. And instead of anything like Slack or REST API, we're just going to call Retool database. We're going to do a Retool database query. We'll call this query get latest query timestamp. And again, that's going to just allow us to move this down a little bit here just to give us a little more room. And it's going to allow us to get the information out of that table, right? So we can see if we run this, the latest timestamp is July 14th at 6:10 a.m. This is UTC. So around midnight my time last night was when this last ran. So now we can kind of parse that output into our get BlueSky posts field. And you see here we have this since parameter. And so what this is doing is when we query the BlueSky API, we're able to say, okay, cool. We want to only query posts since our last given timestamp so that we're not doing a bunch of redundant queries and things. So now when we run this, our get latest query timestamp should no longer be undefined because we just defined it in our previous database block. So we can see here it's calling. I think my timestamp is probably going to be a little long, which means that it's gonna time out. So we'll fix that in a second because again, this timestamp hasn't been updated since early this morning UK time. Which, if there are any folks joining from the UK, they know it's much later than 6:10 a.m. on the 14th of July. So we are now querying the timestamp, which is good. But what we want to do is once we get BlueSky posts successfully, we also need to then update our timestamp so that it knows that it has completed successfully another run and query of the API. So what I'm going to do here is actually just shift some of my workflow blocks over. We have just a little bit more room to work with here. So we're distilling our posts here. We're doing our if posts found. Okay, perfect. So we'll now pull this up here. So the only other thing we need now is to say, okay, if we've run a successful query of our BlueSky API, we want to update our timestamp, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So after this BlueSky post query runs, we're going to run another resource query. Zoom in just so you can see a little bit here. We are going to make a database query. And instead of our select like before, we're going to actually just run this update query. So it says update BlueSky latest query, set date to the current timestamp, and make sure that's updated. We'll call this update latest date time. And now this is able to run after the get BlueSky posts runs, right? So we'll play this block so that it runs the update query. See, it doesn't return anything. But if we go over here now, we should see, okay, we now have our latest updated timestamp. It's currently 5:28 p.m. UTC. And you can see over here, our timestamp in our database has refreshed as well, right? So now we shouldn't get this timeout anymore over here, but also we won't actually get any posts because we literally just updated the timestamp and there haven't been any posts that mention Retool yet. So let's go ahead and fix that actually. We'll just go over here. I'm just going to go ahead and create a new post that just says testing. Here is a Retool post from AI Build Week. Right. So we're going to go ahead and hit post on this one. And if I go here, we see that our post is here. It's Retool in capital letters. So that is one of the conditions we're checking for. So now if we go here and we run our get BlueSky post, we're going to run this with the previous blocks so that it also runs this block as well. But if we do that, we can see this block spins, it gets our timestamp, and then this block spins. And we should see that we do have, a single post here, and that's the one we just saw, right? So we can then, just to kind of test as we go, we can run each of these blocks. Because we've run the one before it, it will be able to use the output. So we see here that our if condition is successful. We can run our distill posts test, and we can see that it pulls down our one post from our data here into just the actual underlying information. Looks like that's timing out for some reason. Let's try that again. Cool, there it is. And now this is our AI step. So let's see what score it gives this post. I would think, because it mentions AI build week, it should probably be a pretty high score, but let's see. We'll go ahead and run this. And again, we're just stringifying via the JSON library all of the data from our distilled posts step. And so that's just taking this, dumping it as a string into the prompt. If you have more data than this to use in a particular AI call, that's where you may want to use something like a vector, which was our session from Tuesday. But in this case, we know we're going to have at most, a few posts here because this is running every 10 minutes. And so we're just going to dump that all in the prompt. These models have a big enough context window. So it looks like in this case, it gave it a score of 10, which is exactly what we would expect. It's very relevant to Retool. We're going to go ahead and filter our relevant posts. It looks like here it did include these kind of triple backticks with the JSON. And so it's having a little bit of a hard time parsing that. And this is an example of where it can be really difficult to kind of mesh the AI block with the code block, just because different models will handle this entirely differently, right? So we asked it for just the JSON array, no other text. But if we see this as a failure, we could also ask to say, do not include backticks or any other formatting other than the raw JSON array. Right. So that's a little bit more guidance for our prompt here. We'll see how it handles that. And it looks like it did it for us that time, which is great. If it didn't, this would be a good chance to experiment with a GPT model, maybe from OpenAI or one of Google's Gemini models, or a custom model that you have set up in Retool in some other way. But in this case, just being a little bit more specific with our prompt and telling it, please don't include any backticks, was able to get where we need to go. So then we will have this filter relevant post step, which now, because it's just JSON coming out of our prompt, it is able to do for us. And that's great. And so that works very well. And so now you can see we have this URI field here. And that is what, if we run this Slack step, is what's going to go into Slack. So we'll hit play on this. We see that it actually did post there. And I will just pop over real quick to our Slack channel, which I need to actually share my screen with y'all. 1 second. This is a separate window from the the Chrome window we were just looking at. But you can see here, our post actually did come into Slack, which is pretty cool. So this is an example of a workflow that's now running end to end, which is pretty cool. And we just need to kind of take a few more steps to set this up and actually get it running in production. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. So the one thing we mentioned that we haven't actually done yet is getting it to run on a schedule. So I was running each of these workflow blocks one by one, but we want this to be a thing that kind of just runs in the background, right? So first of all, I'm going to go ahead and click deploy on this so that it's actually, everything's saved. Our latest version is all set to go, because now we like how this is running. Our timestamp, we also, because we ran these workflow blocks one by one, we want to make sure that that's updated. But if we run our workflow end to end, that will automatically update for us. So now we're in a pretty good spot with this. This is where we come over to our triggers tab of our Retool workflows here. And we can trigger this workflow via a webhook, which means, a post request or someone asking for it in a Slack message or something. But in this case, we want to use the schedule trigger. And what this will do is allow us to run this workflow on a schedule. So in this case, we can say, okay, UTC is the time zone. We want to run this, every minute, every hour, every day, etc. So we can say, okay, we'll run this every minute. In production, we want to only have one of these running at a time. And that will run, every minute for us. Let's just say every hour for the sake of, not completely spamming this. We can hit save on that.
Hey, Keenan, jumping in. I think you're not sharing your screen right now. So Thanks
Correct.
everyone for all
Great.
the feedback.
Great call. Yeah. Thanks, y'all. I'm seeing the chat blow up, which I was not looking at before, but thanks for jumping in. Cool. I will jump back just a second because none of y'all saw anything that just happened. So we have our workflow set up, and we're going to go over here to our triggers tab. And in the triggers tab, we can, again, have the webhook option if we wanted to trigger this like as an API, for example. But we're going to use our schedule, which allows us to specify basically the interval when this runs. So in this case, we currently have it set up to run every hour at 0 minutes past the hour. So, in my time zone right now, it's 12:35. So this would run in 25 minutes. For example, though, if I wanted to run it at 12:40, which would run in 5 minutes, right? This will run every hour at 40 minutes past the hour. So you can get kind of specific here, and kind of set up anything the way you want to. But if you want even more control and you're familiar with cron syntax, you can specify that here as well. So there's two different kind of options, interval and cron here. And we can have this, basically run as much as we want. So now that we have this, if we hit save changes, this workflow is basically set up to run on that schedule. So at 40 minutes past the hour, it will run, and it will, grab any relevant posts. It will filter them into Slack, and it will let us keep an eye on what's going on social media. So we use BlueSky in this example because the API key is very easy to get. It's a very simple API to interact with, and all of that. But you could absolutely expand this to any sort of social network or any other type of monitoring that you wanted to. This is just kind of an idea to put in your head about a potential use case for this sort of thing. And so at any point, I can come down here to the run history, and I can see, okay, when did this run? How long did it run for? What happened? And because we ran all of these blocks individually, we don't have anything in the run history. But let's go ahead and click run on this, and you'll see that our run history pops up right away, and it gives us a pretty significant level of detail on what's actually going on. So in this case, our start trigger, we can see that we didn't have any data as part of our start trigger. We queried for the latest timestamp. You can see it got the latest timestamp here, 5:33. That was the last time it ran when we updated it. It queried the BlueSky API, and it didn't find any posts that matched our search term, which makes sense because we just queried it previously, and that's kind of how our timestamp is supposed to work. We only want posts since the last time we queried it. It ran our if block and basically decided that it didn't find any posts, but it still updated our latest date time, right? So this is even when it finds no posts in the API, we still wanted to update our date time so that we're not, again, querying a bunch of old content that we don't care about, or we already looked at it and decided it wasn't relevant, right? So in this case, because our if condition came back as false, you can see that distill post, decide relevance, all these other blocks were skipped because they were not part of this particular run of a workflow, right? So at any point, you could completely close down this tab, come back, and say your workflow has been running every hour. If you come back tomorrow, you'll be able to see 23 or 24 runs in this history list. And any of those that you see, you can dive into and see, okay, what were the posts that pulled from the API? What was the response of the AI action, right? Which I found is pretty useful. Sometimes the AI action, like we saw in our example, just kind of stops parsing things or starts parsing them differently, and your workflow starts to break, right? And so that's a case where you really want that ability to kind of dive deeper and see what's going on there. So the run history is super useful for that, especially for these things you kind of just put into the background and are more set it and forget it. Cool. So yeah, we have a working workflow. Hopefully that was a kind of helpful over the shoulder look at how I build workflows, because this is one that I've actually built and we are currently kind of using in production at Retool. So we looked at kind of one of these types of uses for workflows, which is like a headless monitor, right? So headless, I mean, there's no need for any sort of user interface, really. There's no need for sort of end users to be able to interact with this thing that we've built. But, it is just kind of running in the background. Think of it as good for replacements for things like cron jobs, everything that needs to run every so often, but there doesn't need to be a huge amount of like human interaction, for example. Another good use case for workflows that we use quite a bit and we see customers use as well is kind of quote unquote serverless functions. So if you're familiar with AWS Lambda, basically a kind of self-contained piece of what most people would call backend code that can be invoked either on a timer or by, pinging it as an API request or calling it like that. So lots of times you need this for things like something to put behind a Slack bot, right? When you have a bot in Slack and someone triggers it, it needs to actually call some sort of logic on some other system, right? And you could, spin up a server and maintain that and host a whole code base there and do all that stuff. But a lot of times they're just kind of, this Slackbot is an interface for something quick like a database query, or, oh, go check this like set of logs and tell me if there's anything new or relevant that I need to find. And they're just kind of these one-off functions that workflows are a really good kind of paradigm for as well. Anything basically you need, sort of like API in a box, workflows works really well for that too. And something new that we're seeing and really excited about is the possibility for workflows to be tools that AI agents can use. So we recently launched Retool Agents, which we took a look at on Friday of last week. If you haven't caught that, please do. It's over on our YouTube channel. It's just at Retool on YouTube. But basically, AI agents are most useful and really only useful when they have access to tools. And so workflows are already hooked into all of your other business systems. Like we just saw, it's hooked into your database, it's hooked into maybe your social media accounts, maybe your Salesforce data, things like that. And so the workflows give you a really nice way to set, boundaries on what can access these resources, how these resources can be accessed, et cetera, and giving those same sort of boundaried request abilities to an AI agent can be super powerful. So in the example that we built on Friday, we have an agent that has 3 separate workflows that it can use to take action, to build some kind of cool video concepts. So if you're interested in that, definitely bounce over to YouTube and check that out, because that was a fun one. Cool. But yeah, I think that's it as far as the workflow content that we wanted to talk through today with y'all. So again, just kind of a reminder that if you want to post some questions in the chat, please do that. We have looks like about 20 minutes to get to a bunch of those. We already see some coming in, and the Retool folks in the chat are helping to grab all of those for me. So yeah, please post those in the chat, and we will take a bunch of those now. Cool. We have the first question here. What is the Slack bot that's used in the Looper? Is that a function, a Retool agent, or something else? Yeah, so basically, let's bounce actually back over here and take a look at what that is. So Retool offers a bunch of different, we call them resources, which are basically integrations to other tools. And Slack is one of them. So when you have a new workflow block, you can give it a resource query and basically say, okay, REST API is just the default that pops up here. But we can say, okay, we want to call, we want this to be a query into Slack somehow. This is an integration that we basically set up ahead of time so that this is connected to our specific Retool Slack instance. So it knows everything about our channels. It has the proper level of access that our administrators have decided is appropriate, all that stuff. So this makes it really easy for this kind of integration to be set up once and then reused by multiple people across the organization. So once we say this is the Slack integration we want to use, we can then kind of configure this to say, okay, we want to post a message into a particular channel. If you wanted to do something like, list out all the conversations that are existing, all of the other various things you can do with the Slack API are kind of pre-built into this operations list. But by far the most common is, we want our Retool workflow to be able to post into Slack, right? And so based on which one of these operations you pick, you then get these different options of, kind of pre-populated things we think you'll probably need. Our posts were just plain text, so we use the text parameter here. But if you want to use the fancy sort of Slack markup that you can do, you can do that here as blocks as well. So you can kind of choose your own flavor there. But that is just a pre-built integration that we already have as part of Retool. So hopefully that's helpful. I do just want to flag that Daniel in our Zoom chat is going to be posting a poll. This is super helpful for us to know if today was useful to y'all, if you wanted to see us do something differently. Again, as Sarah mentioned, this is not the last one of these we're going to do. So once you see that poll pop up on your screen, please just give us a quick thumbs up, thumbs middle, or thumbs down. And if you do thumbs middle and say it was solid, but I had questions, please, again, drop those in the chat. We'll keep going through those. All right. Let's delete this here just to clean this up a little bit. Cool. So hopefully that was helpful via Slack. But yeah, it's a built-in Retool integration that you can use because we found that a lot of folks want to, either from Retool apps or from their workflows, call Slack. So that's something that is useful. All right. Question from Michael. Yeah, welcome back, by the way. I feel like a familiar face around here at AI Build Week. So his question is, decide relevance block, which is a reminder, which is our AI prompt here, makes decisions for a batch of posts in one single LLM call. And while that's simple and cost effective, as you're only prompting the LLM once, the model could give a different decision depending on what other posts it has read before. So, the different posts in a given batch could influence each other. So his question is, do you have further guidance, pros and cons for calling the LLM in a batch versus calling the LLM in a loop? Yeah, I think this really depends on what sort of overlap you are seeing, what sort of kind of, for lack of a better word, contamination between the individual posts you're seeing. Um, and in our case, the testing that I've done for this particular use case, I found that it's able to evaluate each post pretty independently, because we've given it kind of that specific guidance of saying you're getting a batch of posts. Please look at them one at a time, give each of them a score. Like, it's able to understand kind of the nuance of that language. But again, if this is something you were concerned about, you could in the prompt very explicitly say, evaluate each post one at a time, etc. And give it more explicit guidance in that way. But again, yeah, if you're finding that you're seeing a lot of posts that are kind of coming through as relevant that you don't think they are, and you think that's because they're getting contaminated by previous decisions, then that would be the case where, yeah, you would just use, like we did for Slack, you would use a loop block here. And instead of the Slack resource, you would use the Retool AI resource. And you could say, okay, cool. We're going to loop through each of these posts. We're going to just prompt the AI one at a time for them. And that would give you kind of a clean slate, a blank slate each time. So something that you would definitely just need to experiment with and see if you feel like that's the reason you're not getting the output that you want. But in my experience in this particular workflow, we've been running this for a bit now. It's able to distinguish that. I think the other thing that's helping there is we're not giving it a set of 100 posts, for example, right? I think that as you kind of utilize more of the context window, that's where that confusion might start coming in. We're giving it a very focused set of, here's just basically the text of the post. That's pretty much it, and the URL, and limiting that to a pretty contained list of just a few posts. So that's been helpful, and I haven't found any problems in this particular use case. Cool. Gabriel asks, how wide are you planning to expand the resources or tools that the workflows and agents have access to? Yeah, so that's a good question. I will say that we have a long list of integrations that we already kind of natively support. I believe actually that if we go over here, yeah, this is our brand new integrations page, which just launched this week. And so you can kind of go through here and see all of these different tools that we already do have integrations for. And just like Slack, these can just be natively used inside of your workflows. You don't have to do any sort of custom, API calling or anything like that to get access to any of these tools that we have pre-built integrations for. So we're always looking to expand this list, obviously largely based on customer feedback. So if a new tool comes out and a lot of our customers are asking for, okay, why can we use this? Where can we use this? How can we use this? We consider that pretty heavily when expanding this list. So if there's a tool that you wish integrated into Retool more natively, definitely hop over to the community and make your voice heard there. But another thing that we have as kind of a flexibility of Retool is you'll notice here that some of these aren't tools per se, they're just kind of protocols, right? And so if a tool that you like isn't supported here, you can use our REST API connector, our GraphQL connector, our SOAP API connector to basically make just a dedicated API call to that service. So even if you don't have an integration natively available, as long as the tool you're trying to integrate with has some sort of API, you can use this REST API integration or any of the other API integrations as well to access that. And for agents specifically, we support using MCP servers as tools as well. So if you have an MCP server that you want to use, you can give your agent access to that MCP server with just the same sort of native resource integration we looked at with some of these other tools. And then your agent will have access to all the tools that that server supports as well. So we're very focused on being super platform agnostic, data format agnostic, and trying to let you connect as many and as varied of tools as you would like. So again, look at the list here, retool.com/integrations. If it's one that's not on this list that you want to see, definitely let us know in the community. But we're always thinking about how to make other tools easier to integrate with Retool. All right, let's keep going here. Alexi asks, if you're just experimenting and playing around with multiple structured/unstructured data sources and wanted to leverage AI to gain insights on that interrelated data, what would you recommend? Workflows or agents for exploratory work? Yeah, this is a good question and kind of talks about the architecture differences between workflows and agents. So um, the key difference that I kind of see is that if you are working on a problem that potentially um, you want the AI to be able to take sort of multiple steps to do its own investigation, and the path to a solution isn't always the same each time. That's where an agent really comes in handy, where you can say, okay, cool, here's the agent, you have access to these tools, and then the AI in that case is kind of deciding on the approach of, okay, how do I go about this? What tools do I use? Do I have to ask the user for follow-up information? Whereas if the path from initial problem to a successful solution is more well defined, that's where a workflow might come in handy, right? So it looks like in your example, you have a bunch of data about a client, structured data entries, previous chat history, and you just want to experiment with what insights you can get out of it. And so in that case, I would maybe start with even something more open-ended than a workflow or an agent. I would just say, okay, cool. Can I do a single sort of AI action, maybe in an app, in our app builder, for example? And depending on how much data you have, you might be able to just put all of that into the prompt and ask for suggestions on, okay, based on all of this, what sort of follow-up questions should I ask this client? Or what things maybe am I not, what patterns am I not seeing here? Those sorts of open-ended questions, just as even as a single LLM call, um, are really kind of informative to me, at least, about where to go from there, and that will hopefully sort of influence the next pattern you take. But in general, if the path from beginning to end is more structured, that's where I would recommend a workflow. There can obviously be LLM steps in the middle to give you that generative sort of output. But if you don't know, or the path from beginning to end is going to be kind of different for each particular set of data or problem you're encountering, that's where an agent with that flexibility is helpful. Cool. Yeah. Ashley asks, why do we need to filter relevant posts code? Isn't that what the AI prompt is doing? Why do we need this? And isn't this redundant? Yeah, good question. First of all, welcome back. I feel like another familiar face. And I've enjoyed your questions this whole week. But basically, this filter relevant posts, if I wasn't clear, the AI is not making any decisions on like culling the posts out of the array. It's assigning every single post a score between 1 and 10. So this filter relevant posts code, what this is actually doing, this step right here is really the key piece. It's saying, okay, any post greater than 4 is going to get passed through. Any post that's less than 4, is going to fall out of the array. So the AI is not doing any of that filtering for us. It's just doing the scoring. This code here is actually deciding, okay, anything less than a 4 is not relevant, and so shouldn't be passed to Slack, right? So that's what that's doing there. Hopefully that's helpful. Cool. Jumping back just briefly to the topic of integrations, we had a post in the chat noting that a Tableau connection would be great, and yeah, absolutely, it's on our list and something that we're exploring there. So we know that a lot of folks use the sorts of BI tools in conjunction with Retool, so appreciate it, and thanks for the feedback there. Cool. All right. Audrey asks, not sure if I caught it, so apologies if repetitive. No worries. That's why we're here. Do you have any tips on how to ensure the output of the AI block is something that could be easily parsed in later code blocks, like a JSON object, or any tips how to handle for when the output is not in the expected format? Yeah, good question. There are a couple different ways to do this, but this is at its core one of the difficulties with integrating AI into more sort of deterministic workflows, right? Because like you saw in our example, or maybe if you joined late, you didn't see, but originally when we ran this AI step, it didn't give us this like clean JSON output. It had triple backtick JSON and triple backtick, right? And when it's outputting in like a web chat, that's useful for formatting reasons. But when we're calling it via the API, we really don't want that, right? So there's a couple different ways to get around that. The way we got around it is we basically just in the prompt said, do not include backticks or any other formatting other than the raw JSON. So this is a fine way to go about this. It's a little bit frustrating because it is kind of just like trial and error. You have to wait for there to be a failure, see what type of failure happened, and then update your prompt. So in that case, it's a little bit like if you want to have some more confidence, that's maybe not the best way to go about it, but that does work. And that's by far the simplest approach. Just explicitly updating your prompt every time you see some sort of failure and trying to account for that particular failure case, being more specific in your instructions, that sort of thing. The other option is basically you could use something like this, this code step here that we have, to try to parse the output. So for example, if you're expecting JSON output and you have a Python block or a JavaScript block that runs, a JSON parse, and that JSON parse fails, you know that it didn't output valid JSON. So you could either then like loop back and try to call the LLM again. You could exit and send some sort of error notification. There's a bunch of different options there, but you can use kind of the strictness of code to enforce the output of an LLM. The other thing that's sometimes useful is you can chain LLM steps together, like we talked about before. So you could have another large language model step here, another AI step that basically evaluates, is the output of this first step valid JSON? If not, please clean it up until it's just valid JSON, etc. So again, that's not a 100% foolproof answer, but at least then you have kind of two separate language models looking at the problem, and we've seen people get a lot higher success rates with that sort of approach as well. So there are multiple different ways to go about it. Again, a little bit depends on your use case, but and how much kind of certainty you need and how much error handling you want to do. But hopefully that's helpful. Thanks for the question. All right. We'll take a couple quick ones here, and then we've got a little bit of a deeper dive one to wrap up. So yeah, we had a question on what is the concurrency limit configuration option. Yeah, so basically that was over in the triggers, I believe. We saw here under concurrency limit. And basically what this says is exactly what this tooltip says here. So this is the maximum number of in-progress runs of the workflow that are allowed, right? So in this case, we only want one run happening at a given time, right? This shouldn't be an issue because we're only running it once an hour. This workflow doesn't take an hour to run. But for example, if you have a longer running workflow, or if you have a workflow that's sort of waiting for human input or something, you could imagine a world where another workflow trigger might happen while the first one is running. And if you're reading and writing to or from the same database or the same shared resource, that could cause weird race conditions or other things that you don't really want to happen, right? So that's when this is useful. But yeah, that's basically what that does. Is just the amount of active runs that can be happening at one time. If this is set, it won't let another run kick off before it stops the first one. All right. And then we had somebody in the chat ask, is there support for memory with Retool AI? So right now, that's not something that we support natively. It's something we are actively working on, especially in the context of agents. But we do, like I mentioned before, have Retool database, which is very useful for kind of an in-place memory store. So if you have things that you want your AI to remember, that's a case where you could spin up a database table and just basically call it, memories or something, and write individual rows there, and then pull all of that in as context into, the prompt for the next time this workflow runs. For example, if you have, if you want to kind of create your own chat interface, which we showed a little bit about with Retool GPT last week, we are saving kind of each of those messages and each of those message threads that a person kind of interacts with our AI into Retool database, so that the next large language model call that happens, it has all that history available. So you can kind of give your AI memory that way, but more to come on that for sure. All right, cool. Let's do a question from James here. I've used a lot of dynamic resources in my app building. I've run into the issue where the agents cannot use dynamic resources. For example, if you have many MySQL databases and you want to determine which one to run based on a dynamic resource ID, is that something that's achievable in some way? Cool. Good question. By the way, welcome back as well. I feel like I've seen you around this week as well. But yeah, I think this is probably a problem for agents. And again, this is the kind of thing where if we go back and look at some of our architectures here, instead of, this is kind of maybe the architecture that you want, instead of an LLM routing between different LLMs, in your case you would probably have an LLM routing between different databases. And so you'd have to get some sort of list of those databases and kind of the selection criteria into the initial prompt. But I would anticipate that if you asked your agent to make a selection on the relevant data source first, you could then have all of those data sources set up as tools and say, okay, please make a selection on this first. You could do any of the kind of common prompting tricks, like explain your reasoning or whatever before you make a choice, to both be able to see what it's thinking, but also we found that that gives a little bit better output. But then if all of those databases are tools, then you could see that it selects the right one. Another way to kind of make sure this continues to happen correctly is to use the evals that we looked at on Friday. So if you haven't seen that on Friday, definitely go back and check it out. But basically you can eval whether your agent is making the correct tool call based on the input. So you could give it an input where you would expect it to choose data source one, for example, or database one, um, and ensure that then it does make that correct tool call. So you could set up all those different evals, and then run those to make sure that, okay, now that we have that sort of prompting selection logic in place, those evals will give you more like pass fail, whether it's making those choices correctly. But yeah, it's going to require a little bit of experimentation, but I hope that was helpful, pointing you in the right direction. Cool. Yeah, all right. Mike asks, are there any human in the loop options for workflows? The answer is yes. So this is something we are rolling out over the coming weeks. We've been testing this with some private beta customers and things, but there is an option for you kind of bringing a human into the loop and flagging that, okay, this is something that a human needs to take a look at, and that is kind of a pause in the workflow, right? So how that looks right now is this concept of a user task, and basically what this lets you do is break out this task, assign it to someone or assign it to a team. You can then have an associated app so that the person who this task gets assigned to has some sort of interface to take action on what they want to what they need to work on. So for example, if it's an approval to send an email, you may build a basic Retool app with just a text box output. You could then have our workflow here populate that text box with the draft of the email that it had created, and then flag to the user, okay, hey, here's the link where you want to go, look at the text here, if it looks good, click the approve button, and then we'll basically kind of go back into the workflow run, and it will just kind of continue to run from there. So it's something that a lot of folks have asked for, and something that we are working on rolling out to everybody, but there's obviously a lot of various edge cases and things here to deal with. So yeah, look for that in your Retool Workflows environment. And if you're not seeing it and it's something you need to use for a use case that you're working on, definitely let us know in the community. Thanks, Mike, for your question. Cool. All right, y'all. Well, we are at the hour. Thanks, everybody, for coming. This was super awesome to see everybody's questions and see everybody here live on Zoom. So again, this concludes our AI Build Week. If you missed any of our sessions this week, they are all available on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@retool. And as Sarah is posting in the chat, definitely head over to the community for the thread of questions, the replay, access to all the resources. You'll be able to download the actual JSON from this workflow. So if you want to run this in your own account, you obviously have to hook up your own Slack and your own AI, but all the blocks that we laid out on the canvas are there in that JSON for you to get started. And yeah, thanks for coming, y'all.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Keenan, for another incredible session. And thanks to everyone behind the scenes. We loved all your questions and we loved all the engagement. So we'll continue the conversation in the community. We shared so much information today and so many resources. So feel free to ping us. And yeah, we'll see you back here soon. Thanks, everyone, for joining our first ever multi-day webinar build week. So thank you. Bye.